Hello and welcome. This is Process Costing, a walkthrough with T accounts. Disclaimer and copyright notice: the information and opinions in this presentation are those of the author only and not the author's employers or affiliated organizations, including, but not limited to, Irvine Valley College, the South Orange County Community College District, or Chapman University. This presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute any legal or accounting advice whatsoever. This presentation is copyright 2019 by Bennett Tchaikovsky. I encourage you to share this presentation and share links to this presentation on an unmodified basis. If you modify the presentation in any way, please email me prior to doing so at bennett1812@gmail.com to discuss. Note the author does not claim any copyright whatsoever in any companies or organizations mentioned in this presentation. Rather, those other parties are the owners of their respective copyrights. So process costing is one of the more challenging subjects in cost or managerial accounting. But again, we're really kind of doing the same thing as what we were doing in job order costing. We're kind of figuring out how to get product from work in process to finished goods. And the really thing to think about in terms of process costing is that, you know, we're not doing things for the customer. This is mass production. So we're doing mass production. So this is completely at the opposite end of the spectrum. In fact, for academic purposes, I'm only going to be using 2 work in process accounts. And the reason I'm going to use 2 work in process accounts is just so we can kind of keep track of the direct materials and the conversion, which we call labor and factory overhead, separate. But again, it's the same concept in terms of how we get things through. Now, when we're dealing with process costing, one of the things is that we're going to start certain products, and then during the period, we'll be starting and completing items. But however, at the end of the period, we're going to have ending inventory in our work in process, but that may only be a certain percent complete, because if it was 100% complete, it'd be going over to finished goods. However, it's only going to be a certain percent complete. So what we have to do is we have to use this concept in terms of equivalent units. So what are equivalent units? There are 2 different methods for determining equivalent units, and I'll go into the differences in there in just a moment. The only difference between these 2 are really as how beginning inventory is handled. And under weighted average, when we have equivalent units, we assume that the beginning units were 100% complete during the period. So if you're doing weighted average and you see, oh, well, my beginning inventory was 60% complete or 70% complete as to materials, you ignore it. At the same time, because we're assuming that beginning inventory is 100% completed during the period, for equivalent unit purposes, when it comes to determining the cost per equivalent unit, what we're going to be using to get out of our costs out of work in process into finished goods, we're going to be including those beginning inventory costs in our equivalent units. On the other side, when it comes to FIFO, well, with FIFO, first in, first out. So we're going to take those beginning inventory costs and move them immediately to finished goods inventory. Because we're moving those costs to finished goods inventory immediately under that assumption, then when it comes to the beginning inventory units, we're just going to focus on what was actually done during the period. If I have materials that were, say if I have 10,000 units that were 30% complete as to materials, then I'm going to be using equivalent units of 7,000 or 10,000 times 70%, because that 70% is what I used during the period to make those 100% complete. So the best way to learn about accounting is through doing. So let me just pause just momentarily. So we're back. So when we have a process costing problem, generally what's going to happen is we're going to be given certain amounts of units. And I have some of these posted up for my students elsewhere But really what I want you to kind of think about in terms of like weighted average is that when it comes here to the first thing we're going to do in any problem is we need to figure out our equivalent units. And the reason is why is because when I'm looking at these units and we've got 10,000 beginning, 100,000 started and completed, and then we've got 20,000 units and ending. Now, here under equivalent units, weighted average for materials, I make the assumption that I completed all these 10,000 units during the period. The started and completed, if I see started and completed, it means it was done. So that here is going to be 100,000. Now with this 20,000 units in terms of that being in my ending inventory, basically my ending inventory, what I would ask you is that these are all at 100%. Okay, this 100,000 is at 100%. But when I look at this 20,000 units in my ending inventory, can I write 20,000 units? And the answer is no, I cannot, because these were only 15% complete as to materials. So what I need to do here is I need to take 20,000 times 15%, and I'm going to get 3,000. So really what this is, and thank you, Kat and On, this is going to be 20,000 units times 15%. And really what we're saying here is we're saying that 20,000 units at 15% is the same thing as 3,000 units at 100%. So if you take 20,000 times 0.15, this is going to be the same as 3,000 times 1.0, or 100%. So when we think about equivalent units, I can't compare this to this unless I make them equivalent. So right over here, my total equivalent units here for materials will be 113,000. Now, when I'm doing this here for conversion, which again is essentially for direct labor and also for factory overhead, here it's at 10,000. Here my 100,000 units started and completed, that's going to be the same. But on this case right here, this was 40% complete. So here this is going to be 20,000 times 40%, or 8,000. 20,000 units times 40% complete. And here again, what we're saying is that 20,000 units at 40% is the same thing as saying 8,000 units at 100% complete. So right over here, we have our total equivalent units for this one particular problem will be 118,000. Now, the next thing I'm going to go through and do, and this is usually what the problem is that if over here, and we'll just kind of make this into a big problem just for fun. So the problem would tell me that my beginning materials was, say, I don't know, 60,000. My costs, materials costs were 800,000 during the period. And then over here, my beginning conversion was, say, I don't know, 40,000. And then my conversion costs was, I don't know, we'll say 500,000 number. Okay, so what we have here is that when I'm looking at my work in process accounts, what I'm really trying to do here is I've got 60,000, 800,000, here I've got 40,000, and then here I have 500,000. So what I'm really trying to figure out here is that, well, are these the proper balances in my accounts? And the answer is no, because right here, I transferred 110,000 units out. Basically the 10,000 and then the 100,000. So I transfer those units out. So I really only have a small amount left. So what I need to figure out, and this is really what we're doing, is instead of saying, well, the job was completed, rather what I'm really doing is I'm kind of looking at this in terms of equivalent units. What I want to figure out is say, okay, I've got 860 grand here in total. How much am I going to be taking out? So what I need to do in this case is I'm going to have here equivalent units for material, basic equivalent cost per unit, or so let's say cost per equivalent unit materials. And when we're doing weighted average, what we're going to include is it's going to be the beginning cost plus the cost added. And this is all going to be divided by my total equivalent units materials. So here this is going to be 60,000 plus 800,000, or 860,000 divided by 113. And I'm going to get a totally messed up number because I just pulled this out of my donkey. So right here, I got a cost per equivalent unit of, and there's no way that that thing is yeah, it's going to be some crazy ass. Okay, so there we go. Okay. So we'll call this $7.61. So here, in this case right here, I've got 860,000 in total costs in my materials. And I know that I shipped out 10,000 and 100,000 during the period. So right here, what I need to do is to say, okay, how much do I need to send from work in process materials over here to my finished goods inventory? And we'll do some more highlights because we always love the highlights. And right here, and that's equivalent units right over here. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take here, I'm going to take this 110 times $7.61. And again, where am I getting the 110? This is 10K beginning plus 100K started and completed. So right here, this is going to be 110,000 times 761, or 837,100. And this is going to my finished goods inventory. Okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to say to myself, okay, what is now in my ending inventory account here for work in process materials? Well, this is 22,900. What this balance here should be pretty close to is that if I take my 3,000 equivalent units in materials, this should be close to 3,000 times 761. And if I do that here, I'm getting 22,830. The reason why I'm off is I used a messed up number, and that's why I'm rounding, but it's close enough. So this is what my ending balance is in my work in process materials. Again, what we're doing here is that when we're using weighted average, and when we're using these different, when we're using weighted average process costing, we're trying to figure out how do we get costs out of work in process materials over to finished goods inventory. So let's do the same thing for work in process conversion. It's fun. It's accounting after dark. It's great. Actually, this isn't my after dark video. These are legit. So right here, my cost per equivalent unit for conversion. It's going to be my beginning cost plus my cost added for conversion divided by my total equivalent units for material for conversion. I'm going to be sued by the European Union. It's pretty awesome for copyright infringement. Can't wait. So right here, this will be 540,000 right here. And so my beginning cost here for conversion will be excuse me, my total conversion costs were 540. And then my equivalent units for conversion are 118,000. And let's make these a nice UCLA highlight. I don't like, well, I like UCLA. I just don't, I don't know. All my students are miserable there. So if you're one of those students, my heart goes out to you. Okay, so here it's 458. And again, this is gonna be another messed up number. Perfect, Tchaikovsky, great job. Okay, so right over here, again, I'm kind of have the same issue. And this again is that I have my beginning plus my started and completed. So over here, what I'm going to be doing is saying, all right, I got 110,000 times this amount right over here of 458. Well, actually, I should probably just do 458. We'll get a little bit more round, 458. And then this over here is what's going to go to my finished goods inventory. And how did I get that number? It's going to be right over here, 458 times 110. Again, it's going to be the 10,000 beginning plus 100,000 started and completed. When I go through and add this up in terms of the T account, my ending balance right here is going to be 36,200. And when we have 36,200, is there a way I can check my work? So right over here, I'm going to have 8,000 units. So here, this is going to be 8,000 units times 458. When I do 8,000 times 458, I get 36,640. I'm off slightly in terms of my check calculation just because I used messed up numbers. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here, we're going to add these up. So my total costs in terms of what I have in terms of my inventory at the end of all this, I have finished goods inventory, and that amount is 1,340,900. I have work in process materials, that balance is 22,900. And then I have work in process conversion of 36,200 for a total here of 1.4 million. This is what we call our total cost to be accounted for. When I'm comparing this down over here to my total cost to be accounted for, I'm comparing these three values here to what was actually in my cost bank. So again, when we're doing process costing, the key is that the units may not be complete at the same portion. Under weighted average, what we're doing is we're making a huge assumption here in terms of the units in the beginning inventory. We're assuming that they were 100% complete in the period. Therefore, we're going to be including those beginning inventory costs right over here. Then once we get the equivalent units done, then what we have to do is to say, okay, this is in my work in process materials. How do I get them out? I come up with a ratio, which is going to include both my beginning costs and then the cost added, divided by the equivalent units. That gives me a cost per equivalent unit. I do the cost per equivalent unit times basically the beginning plus the started and completed. That goes to finished goods. Do the same thing for both of these right here. So, and then lastly, to do my final comparison, I'm comparing my cost to be accounted for, which is right here, the 1.4 million with this other 1.4 million. So I'm going to pause briefly, and then we're going to use the same example to go through and to do a FIFO question using the same numbers. Well, we're back. And so now we're going to take a look at the same question that I just did momentarily ago, just moments ago. It was an eternity for me with FIFO. And so again, we've got beginning materials cost during the period. So here I'm using my same T accounts. And here we got the same scenario. Now, when I do FIFO, and let's make this FIFO, and EU stands for European Union or equivalent units. My 100,000 started and completed doesn't change. That was fully done during the period. And the other part here is my ending units. That calculation doesn't change because we still have this 20,000 times 15%. And here we've got, over here with the FIFO, we also have 20,000 times 40%. If you have a question in terms of how I got that, cat or on, scroll back about 3 minutes and you'll see how I did the calculation. Okay, so again, this is 20,000. God, I can't believe I'm doing this, times 0.15 times 0.4. Okay, so I get that over here. The next thing I need to go through and do is to deal with my beginning inventory. Now, what happens here under FIFO is first in, first out. What I'm going to immediately do here is I'm going to take my beginning amounts of my inventory under for both materials and then for conversion are immediately going to go into my finished goods inventory. And the kind of then, when we're kind of doing that, what we're really left here is with this 800,000 and then this $500,000 cost. So when we're looking at the equivalent units under FIFO in terms of the beginning units, if these were already 40% complete as to materials, well, guess what? We ship those beginning inventory costs directly to finished goods. So when we're doing the equivalent units under FIFO, what I have to say to myself is, okay, I've got this 10,000 units here that were 40% complete. So what did I need to do during the period to make them 100% complete? Is I'm going to multiply this by 0.6. So this is over here, 10,000 units times 60% or 100% minus 40% complete as to the beginning inventory. Remember, this beginning inventory is really the only difference. How we handle it is the only difference between weighted average and FIFO. Here, for the conversion, it said it was 35% complete. So if this was 35% complete already, and I took those costs out of the account and put it to finished goods, then what I need to do here is to say, well, if these were 35% complete, then I needed to spend 65% during the period, or 6,500. So this will be 10K times 0.65, or 65%. And that's really kind of the logic behind the whole part over here in terms of why we're doing this under FIFO, when we're using equivalent units. Why is that beginning different? It's because of how we're handling getting rid of these costs immediately to finished goods. So what this really leaves me with here is that I now have just essentially a balance of 800,000. And here I have this balance now of 500,000. Okay, so when it comes then to the cost per equivalent unit for materials, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, all right, my cost per equivalent unit for materials are my costs added divided by my equivalent units for materials. Excuse me, my equivalent units for materials under FIFO. So my costs added here are 800,000, okay? If I was doing this with T accounts, 800 plus 60 is 860, minus 60 gives me 800. 500 plus 40 minus 40 equals 500. If that doesn't make sense, go back and look at my financial accounting videos. So over here, my costs, let's go do this for materials first. So over here, I've got my equivalent units for materials under FIFO are 109. So So my weighted average cost per unit, I know this is not going to be a nice number. Let's start, whoa, there we go. Good job, Tchaikovsky. Okay, and let's see how far, oh yeah, there we go, beautiful. All right, so over here, let's do some color coding. Right over here, yellow, and then yellow. And then over here, I'm going to do 109, and 109. So here my weighted average cost is $7.34 per unit. Now, when I go through and do this, I'm doing the same thing. My ending equivalent units are 3,000. So clearly I need to take part of this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out actually my beginning that I finished during the period plus the 100,000 started and completed. So what this is going to be 106,000 or the 6,000 plus the 100K times $7.34. So if I do 106 times 7.34, I get this number right here. This here goes to my finished goods inventory from WIP. And so what I end up with here is I have an ending balance of 21,960. Does this make sense? Well, is there a way we can check our work? Always. Here I've got 3,000 equivalent units, same as in the last problem. If I take 3,000 equivalent units, multiply it by 734, I'm going to get 22,020. I'm off slightly because of the rounding. So that's what I'm doing over here for materials. Now what I have to do now under FIFO is do the same thing for my conversion. So here my costs added under FIFO were 500,000. So my 500,000 right here. And then my equivalent units for FIFO were 114,500. And I'm getting 437, which looks like an amazing, beautifully tuned in round number. So I go over here to my costs. What did I do here is I had to send out basically this part right here, which is going to be the number of units I sent to finished goods was 6,500 plus 100,000 or 106,500. Times 437. So I get 465,405. So here I've got 465,405. And my ending balance here in my conversion is going to be 34,595. Now, can I check my work? Sure. I have here basically 8,000 times 437. I get 34,960, which is pretty close to this balance here. So that kind of tells me in terms of going through, and I realize that I went through this rather quickly, hopefully though it helps. The last thing I always want to do is to do my, make sure that my total costs to be accounted for are good. So in this one right here, what I'm going to go through and do is do finished goods inventory, work in process materials, work in process conversion. And so here I'm going to get, well, might help if I actually add these up. So this is going to be 60 plus 40 plus $1,343,445. This is going to be $21,960, and this will be $34,595 for a total of $1.4 million. So this is going to be under FIFO, and again, the biggest difference in FIFO is because we're first in, first out, or the first goods, these beginning inventory immediately go to finished goods. Because of that, it impacts the way I'm doing my equivalent units. So when I'm doing equivalent units under FIFO, I'm really focused on what did I actually do to complete these 10,000 units in the period. Now, just for fun, let's take a look at this one over here and see what the real differences are. It's pretty minor differences, and again, this is kind of like a cost-benefit side, but that is for another day. Thank you for joining me today on this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Have a great day.